Hi, everybody. I can always tell when you're having really good conversations because you go right up to the very last second. It's like yanking you back to the full room. Before we start back in our conversation, we have a new person that's just joining us, Judy Bellini. Welcome. We've just had a breakout room, and so you haven't missed much, and we're just starting a general discussion. Fred, go ahead.
Well, it sounded like what I was in each group. It sounded like everybody was having a really good discussion. Let's just have about 15-minute discussion about what you just talked about in your groups.
And feel free to unmute yourselves, and I will watch. If you raise a hand, just pop in. We're a small enough group. So if anybody would like to kick off what you talked about in your groups, start in.
I can call on people. Remember, I used to be a teacher.
You don't want him to do that. Martin, you want to go first?
You got something to go.
Yeah, I can go first. Rich.
Okay, Rich, go ahead. That's fine.
Oh, anyway.
Hold on.
Yeah, looking at the first question, whether we've gone astray or not, and we discussed that, and of course, yes, we have gone astray. If you look at the division in the country right now, and whether it be politics or not, we've gone astray. And I think just not getting together like we normally do, because of the pandemic and COVID, we're not able to get together as maybe as neighbors, whether we belong to a pinochle club or whatever. It's just, and the social media has gotten into this too. In other words, that we listen to what they say, and they say, well, gosh, the relationship with people to people, that's what I'm trying to get at. And we're gone astray. We're not being a country as a whole. It's becoming very individualistic. I can't even pronounce that.
Individualized.
Yeah. And so that was my comment. And I'm sure other people have others.
Thank you, Rich. Martin, you want to go ahead?
We started out, let us count the ways. I think we started out with a discussion of the change in news, television news, especially from journalism to entertainment, and went on to like Citizens United and the impact that secret money has played in shaping people's views, propagandizing them for a point of view. Eisenhower's military-industrial complex came up. I think the elites have used their power and wealth to, again, propagandize us, control not only the economy, but lots of other things.
Are you referencing specifically through lobbying efforts?
Yes, in part, and some of it may even be more pernicious than that.
All right.
Don't know.
Okay.
That's probably enough.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Marty and Bob, do you have a comment?
We sort of talked about how things are different than what we saw when we were children growing up, and what we saw around the dinner table, and what issues were talked about. And we talked a bit about the fact that the military conflicts that have happened during our lifetimes, and how things have changed a bit during the time when it used to be when we had conscription, we had a draft, where people were whether they wanted to serve or not, they felt a duty to serve their country. They went and they served, and then came back from Vietnam's a good example. That was the time when I served in the military, and people were very conflicted about what was going on with the Vietnam conflict. There were many people in the society here at home that really were not supportive of any kind of military action. I think there were a lot of people who served in the military who questioned the role and whether or not that was really a winnable conflict for the United States. And then the fact that the draft was abolished and now you have an all volunteer service, I think it's made a difference in the society, and it's made a difference in how people approach what we do as a military. I think less than 1% of the population has anything to do with any kind of military in this country anymore. And so the society overall isn't embroiled or embedded into what we do in defense in this country. And I think it's sort of taken people out of the context of being involved in the society.
Yeah, so basically when you have a war or a conflict in the past, everybody gathered together and was united for the cause of the nation. And we're seeing a shift in that. Is that kind of encapsulate what you're
Well,
saying?
I think it's happened, yes.
All right. Galen?
We talked a little bit about at the very last of our best days behind us. And we actually didn't have complete agreement on that. Some people thought that, yes, they are, but I'm more hopeful than that. 2 years ago, I would have said, yes, our best days are behind us. But now I feel more hopeful. I feel like we're going to be, be coming together. And, if we're able to rebuild the infrastructure and do all the things that the president wants to do and talked about last night, I think it will bring us together. I think that it will improve America's attitude. And because I don't think our best days are behind us. I think we just need to learn to adapt to living in this new world where there's just, too much information, basically 24/7 access to anything you want to know, which may or may not be right. We also talked about questioning the experts. There used to be facts and there used to be opinions, and now people think their opinions are facts and they question the experts in the field. And, there's two separate sets of facts on climate crisis and, science versus science. And so we talked about how that's been kind of a recent development too.
Bobby?
I liked how in our group, I think it was Martin that said, when we go, are the best days behind us, or and he said, up to us. Just flat out, like full stop, up to us. And I think that's a very affirming way to say it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Janice?
Yeah, I would like to get into that too, as far as what I didn't know 9 months ago, or that I know so much more about race and my part in racism and my part in white supremacy that I never dreamed before. I never knew about white privilege. I didn't know about any of this. So yes, it is up to us, because we are going to have 48% white kids in a class and 52% BIPOC. But we have to be ready for that. And how we talk to our neighbors, our friends, our associates, so that everybody is ready for that, because otherwise we're going to continue to be splintered apart.
Thank you. I'd like to move now to a couple of other areas. And in the groups that I was in, I heard a little bit of this, but I want to expand it, and that involves the media. And I get the feeling that folks underestimate the importance of the declining American media. Now, it doesn't mean that, now we're not talking about the decline of the country, we're talking about the media. As we study history, the media has grown steadily throughout our history. We started out with the penny newspapers, where the newspaper would cost a penny, and then we went to yellow journalism and tabloids, and then we did radio, and then remember going to the movies, so the newsreels and the movies, and then the television and the internet and live stream. So we certainly have moved and changed, but our grandson is playing baseball at South Salem, and he's quite good. And so we look for in the paper to see all of the game. Well, now we can figure that if there's any coverage at all about the game, it'll be 2 days after it happened. And so the paper gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And I find myself, because I do want to stay on top of what's going on, I do take the local newspaper, and they say, for the obituaries and all of that. But I take the Oregonian on the days it's delivered, and it's not delivered every day. So it's like 3 days a week, and then I get the local Salem newspaper, and there's just not much there. And occasionally there's a story that I'm interested in, but it's way behind. So in 2021 then, and this is we can see this year, newspapers have shrunk to not tabloid size. We started hearing that for a while, but sub-tabloid size. When I was a boy, I worked for a tabloid in Klamath Falls, and it was called the Modoc Press. And it was founded with the idea that it would be competition for the city newspaper, which had gone on strike. And so it was to counter that. Well, there's one little problem. It didn't do it very well. What can you think of what the reason might be? There was no wire service.
Oh.
See, the daily newspaper had the wire, and the little weekly tabloid, it carried columns like from me when I was in the 6th grade and would write a column. And so you've got to have a wire service. So there was really no competition at all. Now, here's something, and somebody mentioned that they're relying, you got to rely on a glitzy television news program, it's hyped up and somebody's preaching at you and all of that. Well, maybe that's not going to go on much longer. Because this week I read that television companies are beginning discussions about the future of their industry with the significant growth of live streaming and the internet. Now, newspapers have shrunk because of what's going on 24/7 on the cable system. So what do you think TV might be looking at?
Fred, I would think in both cases, I mean, you've identified a trend, but part of that has to do with monopolization of those industries.
That's right.
You look at our newspaper here in Salem is Gannett. How many papers do they own?
Owned by USA Today.
Yeah, you look at television stations. How many does Sinclair own?
Yeah.
And Sinclair puts out a right-wing editorial policy that every single member of that system has to read.
Does anybody know where the Fisher station is in Oregon?
Me too, it's what it used to be.
It's Channel 2 in Portland.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, Marty.
I just concentrations of power. Rupert Murdoch. Monopolization is not good in a lot of areas. And you mentioned live streaming. I was thinking about that. What you say about local coverage is true, but you see other things. I have a grandson who plays football. He's not in high school yet, but I can watch most of his games because the parents live stream it over YouTube or some other social media device. You look at these instances. If we had to depend on the newspapers' coverage or television stations' coverage of police killings, the Floyd result would have been much different. It was a 17-year-old who was brave enough to stand up in the face of, I'm sure, at least stern looks, if not admonitions and threats, and capture on, in a digital format, everything that took place. That's going on more and more and more and more. So, in a sense, it replaces or at least augments the lack of local coverage.
Neil, you had a comment?
Yes, like our 3 stations we have in Portland have 2.5 hours of local news and a half hour of national news. And it's really not news anymore. There are all kinds of human interest stories about this store starting or this store. They don't report on anything except they're not news. They're a news magazine with featured articles. And so it's really very easy to, and if you listen to the whole segment, they repeat the same story every half hour. So you get bored and you don't even watch them. That's I may watch the weather forecast and that's about it. So I think the local news is not news anymore. It's just a human interest story that you're not very interested in most of the time.
Bobby,
I think I'm interested just in the generation between myself and our kids. There's no channel 2, channel 6, channel anything. They plug in their computer to their TV and they get their Disney Plus, Hulu, they get whatever they want. They search for it. They get that, and gone are the days. I think that's going to be leaving shortly, and I don't. There's no more like Fireside where everyone sits down and sees the same news. That's gone away, and now the TV channels have gone away. Maybe someone watches this program, but they don't get it from like there's nothing like Tuesday night we all gather and watch this. It's like all computerized and streaming. And so I think it'll be interesting to see where people in the future get news or get what they call news. And I also agree with everything. I think, Neil, were you just talking?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Neil said about what's going on with the usual, CBS, ABC, that kind of news. It's all auditory clickbait. Between 2 shows, they'll say, "Is your bathtub killing you? News at 11." And then it's just fluff. And we just don't even watch that. And weather report, it's right on my phone.
that's right.
So the
Janice?
question,
So it's time for me to put my plug in for public television. They continue to give us both sides of the story, and almost anyone that'll respond, they have both sides of the story. We don't hear just one side. And I think that we get a well-rounded, and then to watch BBC before that, it was interesting last week before the trial finished, BBC covered the George Floyd trial more in depth, to the point where I said, no, I can't watch it. It was just too. I mean, they were just really going into the pictures and the stuff, and I couldn't watch it. It was too upsetting. But yeah, that's my little plug, because I do find that I feel that we get a good wide range of news from public television and public radio.
You too.
I will add one thing. In
Carol?
retirement, both my husband and I have learned that there are PBS or OPB shows on in the afternoon that we didn't ever know about before. I had been thinking that it was all kids programming, but now there are different channels. So listening to news from Britain, from Germany, and from France, it's all done in English, but listening to world events from a different country really has helped me broaden a little.
Some of you know about my pen pal from Ireland, from Belfast, and one of the we talk fairly often, and we send notes back and forth quite often, and he's interested in politics, and so we compare notes, and it's very interesting. Yeah, it's what Carol just said is very interesting, because there's a difference. And so, you know, there's a lot to that. Any other comments on that? Well, let's move on then to a section that we're calling Empowering Voters. And I've got a series of 5 comments here, and then we'll go to our breakout rooms. First, and these will be on the chat line. First is, does the federal government represent you? Does the federal government represent you? And what about state and local governments? Do they represent you and your thoughts? Most of the time, do you even know that all 3 of these governments exist? And do you feel differently about your representation at the 3 levels? We run through that again. Does the federal government represent you? About state and local governments? Most of the time, do you even know that all 3 of these governments exist? And do you feel differently about your representation at the 3 levels? Second question, what interactions have you had with elected representatives, and what were the interactions? Third, how can we make it easier for representatives to interact with their constituents? And fourth, one that's important to me, since I am the father of it in the legislature, what do you think about open meetings laws?
Fred, can you define what you're referring to when you say specifically open meeting laws?
Yeah. When I was first in the legislature, I represented Lake County down in Southern Oregon, and we started getting stories about school board records or teachers' records that were showing up in the remote parts of Lake County. So somebody was getting these records, and they were passing them around. So that was one part of dealing with it. And then if local government, for instance, wanted to get rid of someone, they'd go into a closed meeting and talk about them, and all of a sudden they were gone. So decisions would be made, and then there'd be a news release or something along that line that would come out afterwards. And so what we did then was pass a law, and we dealt with open records and open meetings at the same year and in the same committee. And so we talked about what records are protected, like personnel records. And we talked about when governments can legitimately go into executive session, and and so that's pretty much what it was, and it's worked out very well. It's been a good law. I tell the story sometimes when this was going on, when we were introducing it. I was in Washington State in Olympia, and so we were in the Capitol, and there were all these guards around these closed doors. And I asked him, I said, what's going on behind the doors? And this police officer said, oh, they're having a hearing on open meetings laws. And so I thought that was kind of made the point. The other thing I wanted to mention was when I was in office and how we dealt with constituents. We had town halls, and you see Wyden and Jeff Merkley having their town hall meetings. We had the city councilman from Salem that was a guest on our Thursday conversations. And so you hear our congressmen, they are often have town halls around. But then what happens when you've got an issue about, say, your highways or your roads? What about safety along the highways? What about Social Security questions? And you know, one of the things that we decided when I was in the legislature was that we were never going to say, well, that's out of my jurisdiction. I don't have anything to do with it. And so we had a bus it was a Greyhound bus. And coming in, if you are familiar, coming in by the lake into Klamath Falls, there's a mountain there, and the rocks would roll down on the highway, and so this rock rolled down and caused this bus to go off onto the railroad tracks. And so we talked to the highway department, and we got them to put safety nets up so that the rocks, when they rolled down, would not go out onto the highway. I got a note from a lady who she said she was so glad that we did something about this, because in the 1930s, one of her relatives was driving that same road and a rock rolled down and went through the roof of the car and decapitated her relative. And so they hadn't done anything about it because she didn't think there was anything that could be done. And so that was that. And I haven't heard of any serious accidents since then. We often would get comments from people about Social Security. They had a Social Security question. Well, that's a federal issue. It would have been really easy to say, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. And we used to talk about when people had Social Security questions, oh, well, I've got to do something about the dark hole of Calcutta. In other words, dealing with Social Security. Well, it was tough for us, but imagine some little old lady out here with their Social Security question, and she didn't know where to go. So she would call us, and we could get it straightened out for her. We knew who to contact, either in the congressional delegation or to call directly, and we could do something about it. So these are questions then, and that come up that we need to deal with that don't take laws. And that's one of the things that we're talking about as we've been talking since September. There's so many issues involving people of color that they don't take a law, they take a change of attitude, or they take knowing who to talk to, who to contact. And so that's why we bring these questions up. So I'd like you to go now into breakout rooms and have a discussion about this. Have you ever tried to contact your legislator? You know, my grandmother, once when I was visiting her in California, they were talking about running a bridge through her neighborhood. All the older people were upset, didn't know what to do. I said, why don't you call your legislator? And they said, oh, well, we couldn't do that. Why? Those legislators do more than pass laws. They're there for you. Congressional people are there to do more than pass laws. In fact, you don't pass that many laws, but how many people deal with constituents? And that's a question. Okay. See you in 10 minutes.